Hey, what's going on, you guys? So in this video, I wanted to share with you guys one of the most effective strategies to solving transition questions. This strategy has helped thousands of students. It's given them the confidence to answer these questions with certainty. And it's also helped to boost these students' scores by 20, 30 points, right, on the digital SAT in reading and writing sections. So let's just jump into it. That strategy, you guys, is simply working systematically. So what does that mean? Working systematically is working step by step, focusing on one thing at a time before you move on to the next thing. One of the big mistakes that students make when they're solving questions on the SAT is they try to do too many things at once, right? They don't take the time to work through a question step by step. They're just trying to jump from questions to answer, right? And between that process of question to answer, there's a lot of mini steps that you have to take, right? A lot of students, they'll skip those mini steps and just jump into an answer, right? And this is what causes mistakes, right, for a lot of you guys. So working systematically is the key, right, to unlocking a boost, right, to your SAT score. So what does that look like for transition questions? Well, the key is, you guys, is working step by step, right? So one step at a time. So when it comes to transition questions, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to really focus on one idea at a time, right? So we want to focus on the first independent clause, and before we jump on to understanding the second independent clause, okay? And then we want to think about, right, the transition word that accurately captures the relationship between these two sentences, right? So this is our systematic process, right? And we're not trying to do all of these things at once, and we're not doing things out of order, okay? We're working in this order. So if you guys have watched some of my other videos, you guys know that I'm a very strong proponent, right? I really love to look at my answer choices first before I read the passage, right? And that's no different here, right? It only takes like a second, less than a second, to know that you're being tested on transition questions, right? Transition questions are the second to last type of question on the reading and writing section of the SAT. They come before the rhetorical synthesis questions, the ones that have like the outline notes, right? It's the long question, right? The last one or two questions for the reading and writing section of the test. Transition questions come before that, right? And so it doesn't take a lot of time to know that you're being tested on transitions, right? And secondly, is when you're reading the passage, you know that for a lot of the other questions that I answer, I plug in answer choice A when I read the passage the first time through, right? Well, that's not the case for transition questions. For transition questions, I don't want to plug in my answer into the passage. Now, why? Well, that's because transition words, when they're used incorrectly, they cause a lot more confusion, right? Secondly, you don't always need a transition word to know the relationship between two sentences, right? So for example, if I say, guys, I yelled at my mom, I was grounded. Right. You don't have to know, you don't have to hear me tell you what the transition word is for you to know, for your brain to recognize the relationship between these two sentences. Right? You know that the relationship is cause and effect, right? Like you yelled at your mom was the cause that led to the effect or the consequence of you being grounded, right? So you don't always have to know the transition to know the relationship. And like I mentioned before, is the SAT will have 3 wrong answer choices, right? So if you read a wrong answer choice, it could only cause more confusion. So if I said, I yelled at my mom, although she grounded me, right? I yelled at my mom, however, she grounded me. Your brain could go, what? That's really kind of confusing. Okay, so this is why I don't plug in the answer choice into the passage when I read it the first time through. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm trying to just understand the independent clause before I move on to the second independent clause, right? So here, the first independent clause reads, the human brain, a remarkably intricate organ composed of 86 billion neurons, communicates via an elaborate network of synapses and neurotransmitters. Okay, so before we move on, and the reason why I'm stopping here is because I have a semicolon, and a semicolon's job is to separate two independent clauses, right? So now what this tells me is that this transition word here, that's part of the underlined blank, right, is going to communicate the relationship between this previous independent clause, the one that we just read, and the one that's going to come next, right? The one that kind of follows, right, the underlined blank. Okay, so this is why I kind of stop here, and I'll try to wrap my mind around what I just read. Right now, a nice little tip that I could give you here, you guys, is focus on the independent clauses first. The independent clause, right, the main clause, that's where the core or the main idea is. All of the other stuff in the sentence, like non-essential phrases, dependent clauses, those just give you more details, right? But first, to understand the core idea of the sentence, start or focus on the independent clause, right? So by doing that, I know that the sentence is about the human brain. Now, what can it do? Right? It really communicates. Right? It communicates through this sort of very complicated system, right? It's an elaborate sort of system. It communicates through a complex system. So this first sentence is really telling me how the human brain communicates, right? It communicates via this elaborate network of synapses and neurotransmitters, right? I also know, kind of like just by looking at the details, I know that, man, there's 86 billion neurons, right? So there's a lot of neurons, right? And they're all communicating with each other. Man, that must be a very complicated system, right? So this is what I'm thinking about in terms of my understanding that first independent clause, okay? And then from there, what do? Then I want to read the second independent clause and understand that idea before I think about the transition words, okay? So the second independent clause says, let me just grab a different pen, different color. It says, even minor disruptions in these pathways, such as those caused by neurodegenerative diseases, can lead to profound cognitive and motor impairments, underscoring the delicate balance required for optimal brain function. Okay, so what is this second independent clause talking about? Well, the second independent clause is really here, right? It says that even small disruptions, right, minor disruptions to this communication system can lead to, can lead to problems, right? Can lead to big problems. Right, so it's really telling us about the consequences, right, to the disruptions, right, that might happen in this communication system that's so complicated, right? So we know that yeah, some of those problems could be like diseases, right? Um, and that's really it. We don't have to understand it in too specifically, like we don't have to understand it in too much of a rich detail. We're just trying to extract the core idea. Okay, so we have that as our second independent clause, right? Small disruptions to this communication system, right, can lead to big problems. Okay, so now once we've done that, then we can now start to think about, right, well, what's the relationship between these two sentences? Right now, this is where, you guys, it's extremely important that you want to do some self-studying. Right? You want to learn or study, right, the meaning and the uses of transition words, right, when you're not taking a practice test. Right? So when you're by yourself and you're self-studying, it doesn't take a lot of time to do this. Keep a journal or a notebook. Write down the most common transition words, right? The most frequently appearing transition words that you guys have seen, right, on the SAT. And there's only a handful of them, right? But they end up using the same transition words over and over again for answer choices. So start keeping a list of that. And then when you have some spare time, right, learn some of the uses. Learn the uses of each of these transition words. Right? That's extremely powerful because if you know how transition words are used precisely, it'll help you guys to eliminate wrong answer choices. Right? It'll help you to eliminate answer choices that do not show the accurate relationship between these two sentences. Okay, so because that's another powerful ways to answer transition questions. So You don't always have to know with 100% certainty what the exact relationship is between independent clause 1 and independent clause 2. But if you know what the relationship is not, right, you can still get the correct answer, right? So for example, I know that for example is not the correct relationship because for example, what it does is the second independent clause will give you an illustration. It'll illustrate or give you an example, a more specific detail, right, point of the first sentence, right? So whatever point was mentioned in the first sentence, independent clause 1, the second sentence will illustrate that. It'll give you specific details that show that, right? That's what I mean by understanding transition words precisely, right? So you know that this is not the case because the first sentence's point is saying that the brain, has a lot of different neurons and they all communicate in a very complicated, using a complicated system. If they gave you an example of that, they would have to provide specific details that show you, right, how these communication system works. So they might say something like, neuron A talks to neuron B in this way, but neuron B communicates this message to neuron C, D, F, and G, right? Whatever that is. They're giving you an illustration of this communication system, right? That's if it were correct. But we know the passage is not doing that because we understood that the second independent clause is talking about the small disruptions in this system, in these pathways, is going to create big problems, right? Like neurodegenerative diseases, And so we can cross out A, right? We can also, right, cross out answer choice C, because in other words, what this does is that the second sentence is going to restate the first sentence, right? So in other words, just basically clarifies what that previous sentence said, right? So for example, if my first sentence is, I am a coward, and the second sentence is going to say, I am even scared of little kittens, right? Well, that second sentence kind of clarifies, right, what that previous sentence says. It restates it, right? And that's, again, that the second sentence in this example is not doing that, right? So we can cross it out, okay? And then also, you guys, similarly, right? Well, similarly, how this is used precisely is that the second sentence, right, kind of compares, it gives you a comparison. It compares the topic, a different topic that was mentioned in the first sentence, right? So for example, if the first sentence said like, oh, Jack likes chocolate chip cookies, and then I say similarly, right, Jill likes, sweet candy, right? So they're kind of giving you a comparison of two different people, but they're comparing them in a similar way, right? They both like junk food, right? They both like sweet things, right? They both like things that aren't healthy for you. We wouldn't use similarly if we said, Jack likes chocolate chip cookies. Similarly, Jill likes healthy bananas. Like that wouldn't make any sense, right? Because it's not comparing two similar things. It's giving you a contrast between two different things, right? One, it's healthy, the other is not, right? So, but anyways, the point is, in this case, similarly would not be the correct transition as well, right? Because again, the second sentence is not comparing a topic in that similar way, right, as the previous sentence. If the second sentence talked about some other body part that had a very complicated communication system, then that would be okay, right? But again, the second sentence is just really telling us, right, that if we have even small disruptions, there can be big problems, right? So we know that D would be incorrect. Okay, so one of the ways to get to the correct answer, and this is an extremely powerful way, when you work systematically through transition questions, you're able to see what the relationship between the sentences is not more clearly, right? So you're able to see that the relationship is not an example, it's not a restatement, and it's not a comparison, right? So that'll leave you with answer choice B as your correct answer, okay? Now, some other cases, it might be easy, and to some students, it might be easy to see the relationship between two sentences, right? Um, Other students, though, it's not that easy. Okay, so this is where it becomes extremely important that every single one of you guys takes the times to study transition words on your own time, right? Write a list of the transition words that show up again and again and again, and then start to use ChatGPT. Ask ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, could you help me understand how this transition word is used precisely, right? And can you use simple language to explain? ChatGPT will give you guys some examples and talk about the uses of it, and that'll give you guys the knowledge, right? Study that because that'll help you guys to answer transition questions a lot more effectively, okay? But to go one step further for you guys here, the word consequently, this is just a synonym for therefore, right? Words like thus, hence, as a result, right? Accordingly, right? These types of words, you guys, show cause and effect. Okay, so it's basically saying that the second sentence is the sort of result or the sort of natural, logical consequence of what the previous sentence said. And that makes sense here, right? Because the previous sentence tells us, right, that there's so many, the human brain is such a complicated system. There's 86 billion neurons in it. It's extremely complicated the way that they communicate, right? And so because of that, what's the natural or logical consequence of that extremely complicated system? Well, the natural consequence is there might be big problems even if we have minor disruptions, right? That's how complicated the system is. So if we have small disruptions, that could have a big impact, right? So that would be a logical consequence, right? A natural result of that previous sentence, right? This is why B would have to be the correct answer, okay? So guys, practice this. I'm telling you, the way to get good at transition questions and the way to get good at all SAT questions is to work systematically. In order for you guys to work systematically, you have to be able to think systematically, right? And each question type has its own sort of system of thinking, right? And you'll start to hear me use that terminology a lot for other questions. But for transition questions, right, that system of thinking is just logically working through things kind of step by step, right? One thing at a time. You know, I've showed you guys how to do that. If you have any other questions, you guys, please write it in the comment box below. Please also share with me one thing that you learned, one thing that was really helpful in this video. It really gives me a good sense of, what type of information is valuable to you guys. And also, please let me know one thing that you want to learn for future video, like one thing that you're having trouble with or that you're curious about, because I read all of these comments and I create videos on based off of your comments. It gives me a lot of good inspiration. So please help me out there. Also, you guys subscribe and like the channel. It'll really help to spread the word to other students who need this, right? We want to we want to cooperate with each other. You liking this is going to help other students. You liking this is going to make me feel a lot more motivated and inspired to create more and more videos, to do more and more for you guys. And so it'll just all work in a very sort of virtuous cycle. Okay, so you guys can help me out in that way, offering these you guys these top test strategies, top 1% test prep strategies for free. An hour of my time is really expensive, but I'm not in it for the money. I'm really in this for the impact. And so you guys can help me out in that way. I won't need to charge, right, so much money, because I'll have a trillion-dollar company in Google, right, kind of paying me through views, subscriptions, and ads. Also, you guys, please let me know if there's anything else in any other way that I can support you guys on this test. You know that my number one mission, my number one goal for you guys is to help you to miss fewer than 5 questions wrong consistently on this test. It's a goal that I'm absolutely committed to achieving, and we're going to do so right with these daily videos, teaching you guys one thing at a time. Okay, that'll do it, you guys. Remember to always stay curious and never stop learning. You guys got this. Take care, y'all.